long before the Egyptians raised sails on the Nile, before the Vikings set their longships to sea, even before Homo sapiens walked the earth. A group of ancient humans gathered on a distant shore, planning a journey no one had ever attempted until then. A million years ago, long before recorded history, our ancestors weren't just wandering the land, they were building ancient water rafts robust enough to cross the open seas. They were explorers of the deep, voyagers into the unknown. This is the forgotten story of humanity's first sailors, and how the sea, far from being a barrier, became our greatest highway. Scholars long thought that the capability to construct and victual a watercraft and then navigate it to a distant coast arrived only with the advent of agriculture and animal domestication. The earliest known boat, found in the Netherlands, dates back only 10,000 years, and convincing evidence of sails only show up in Egypt's Old Kingdom around 4,500 years ago. Not until 4,000 years ago is there physical evidence that sailors crossed the open ocean from India to Arabia. But growing evidence over the past few decades suggests that humans have been venturing across the seas to seek out new lands for over a million years. Before we begin, it's important to remember that the sea crossings we're talking about happened incredibly long ago. The boats used at the time were made from perishable materials, wood, reeds, and other organic matter that have long since rotted away, leaving no direct traces behind. Over tens of thousands of years, rising and shifting sea levels since the last ice age have also submerged and eroded ancient coastlines, wiping out many potential archaeological sites. So while we may never uncover the actual boats or rafts these early humans used, we can still piece together who, where, when, and how these prehistoric people made their extraordinary journeys across the oceans. The earliest known example of seafaring dates back an astonishing 1 million years, possibly even 1.5 million, on the island of Sulawesi, Indonesia. This discovery pushes back evidence of ocean travel by more than 800,000 years compared to what was known before 2025. In September 2025, a team led by Budianto Hakim from Indonesia's National Research and Innovation Agency announced the discovery of Acheulean stone tools, including hand axes and cleavers, on Sulawesi. The island has never been connected to mainland Asia, even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age. The narrowest possible gap between Sulawesi and the Asian landmass would still have been around 50 kilometers across deep, fast-moving waters far too wide and treacherous to swim. Whoever made these tools must have intentionally crossed the sea, likely using some form of watercraft, perhaps a simple dugout canoe or raft. Such a voyage would have required planning, cooperation, and tool-making skills, perhaps even some form of spoken communication, suggesting a level of intelligence and organization far beyond what was once thought possible for humans that ancient. The island of Sulawesi lies within a region known as Wallacea, a scattering of islands between Borneo and Australia. This area hosts a unique mix of wildlife distinct from both continents: marsupials and monotremes to the south, placental mammals like apes, elephants, and cats to the north. The deep water channels separating these islands have long acted as formidable barriers, shaping evolution and isolating species for millions of years. Even Homo sapiens only crossed into Wallacea within the last 100,000 years, and yet some ancient humans appear to have made that journey a million years later. At the recently discovered site of Kallio in southern Sulawesi, archaeologists excavated 7 stone artifacts from ancient sandstone layers deposited by a prehistoric river. These small, sharp-edged flakes show clear evidence of deliberate shaping. Analysis of surrounding rocks and a pig fossil dated the site to at least 1.04 million years ago. The discovery brings Sulawesi into line with the island of Flores to the south, where 1 million year old tools have also been found. Both sites indicate that ancient humans were living in Wallacea in the distant past, though identifying which species made them remains difficult without fossils. While miniature human species such as Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis once lived on the islands of Southeast Asia, Flores and Luzon, they were around too recently to have made these tools. So 1 million years ago, it's possible that the ancestors or close relatives of species like Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis might have been living on Sulawesi. It's often thought that the floresiensis ancestors dispersed via Java, but ancient ocean currents would have favoured dispersal from northern islands such as from Sulawesi as well, strengthening the case that the ancestors of these tiny humans may have been the Sulawesi seafarers. Alternatively, the tools found on Sulawesi bear striking similarities to those from Java, suggesting their makers could indeed have been Homo erectus, the early human species known to inhabit the region at that time. At the time of the mystery human's arrival, Sulawesi was an ecologically rich island, characterized by a tropical landscape with rivers and forests, which supported a diverse community of large mammals, including dwarf stegodonts, babirusas, warty pigs, and the two modern species of anoa. The continued survival of many of these animals after the arrival of modern humans suggested they had long coexist with hominin predators, ones more formidable than Homo floresiensis. Another interpretation of how these prehistoric humans made it to Sulawesi has been proposed by Carlos Neto de Covello and collaborators, a hypothesis they have called co-steering. They suggest that early hominins in islands Southeast Asia reportedly exploited rich coastal environments, mangrove forests, tidal pools, riverbanks, and near-shore islands. Developing such a range of foraging strategies would have required deep familiarity with water swimming, handling floating vegetation and logs, and eventually constructing simple watercraft. Sea levels in this region fluctuated dramatically, sometimes even within a few decades, transforming connected land masses into islands and reshaping coastlines again and again. For groups capable of using simple watercraft, each new channel became an opportunity rather than an obstacle. In this way, geography itself may have selected for water competence throughout the region, perhaps far earlier than previously imagined. Sulawesi may have witnessed dozens, perhaps hundreds of arrivals over time, from early Homo erectus and Denisovans to the first Homo sapiens, and later Mesolithic and Neolithic settlers. The key question is whether during the long span of the Pleistocene, these arrivals influenced the genetic and cultural evolution of Sulawesi's inhabitants, or whether the island, like Flores and Luzon, fostered isolated populations that evolved their own adaptations over time. However, not everyone agrees that the sea crossing was intentional. Some researchers propose that early hominins might have arrived by accident, swept out to sea on natural rafts of vegetation during storms or tsunamis, a phenomenon documented in other animal species. While the odds of such random events producing a sustainable population are extremely low, the idea remains a plausible alternative until more definitive evidence emerges. It raises an intriguing question. Was building raft and paddles truly more difficult than mastering the stone tool-making techniques these hominins already possessed? 1 million years ago, humans were crafting Acheulean hand axes with precision and intent, shaped according to mental templates that required foresight, abstract thought, and fine motor control. Perhaps the leap from crafting tools to crafting watercraft wasn't as great as we imagined. If it was Homo erectus that crossed the Sea of Wallacea 1 million years ago, then perhaps their voyages didn't end there. Could they have also braved the narrow Strait of Gibraltar? Most scholars agree that Homo erectus left Africa via the Sinai Peninsula, but that doesn't explain their early presence in Spain before anywhere else in Central and Western Europe. The simplest answer may also be the boldest one. They sailed across the strait. So, just as the way these humans got to Sulawesi in the first place remains a mystery, so does the identity of these tool-making seafarers. The next step would be to find human fossils on Sulawesi from over 1 million years ago. Together, these discoveries suggest that our ancient relatives were far more capable and adaptable than we once believed. Long before modern humans took to the seas, other species of humans may already have been sailing into the unknown. Up until a decade ago, archaeologists assumed the adventurous travels of the legendary king of Ithaca, Odysseus, as reflected in Homer's Odyssey, were the first ventures in the Mediterranean believed to have taken place 10,000 years ago. Some others assumed that sea travel was a human endeavour that started in the Bronze Age. However, ample archaeological and geological evidence have now been uncovered that suggest archaic humans were building rafts and crossing the Aegean Sea as long as 476,000 years ago. The Aegean Isles are a group of Greek islands in the Aegean Sea, with mainland Greece to the west and north and Turkey to the east. The study that led to this intriguing conclusion was carried out by a team of Greek scientists from the Oceanus Lab at the University of Patras. The analysis by geologist Yerios Ferentinos and his team includes bone and stone tools that have survived the passage of time. Tools dating back 476,000 years have been discovered in Lesbos, Milos, and Naxos. The tools found relate to the tools of Homo erectus in Africa and Asia 1.9 million years ago. So how could these tools have reached the Aegean Islands? Previous studies have shown that prehistoric humans walked across seas during the Ice Age, when sea levels reduced and land bridges were created. In order to find out if this also applies to the Aegean, Ferentinos reconstructed the geography of the region 450,000 years ago. To do this, him and his team studied ancient river deltas, which can show how high or low the sea once was and how much the land has sunk over time due to tectonic activity. He found that at its lowest level 450,000 years ago, the coastline was 225 meters lower than it is today. This means that many Aegean islands were connected to each other by land. The Cyclades were essentially a large island, but it remained an island surrounded by sea, cut off from the mainland for at least 5 to 7 kilometers in glacial conditions and 40 kilometers in warmer periods. So even though the islands were linked together, reaching them still required a sea crossing. As a migration dating to around 450,000 years ago predates the evolution of modern humans, the identity of these early Aegean seafarers remains debated. Homo erectus is a strong candidate given the Acheulean-style stone tools linked to their presence found on several islands. Another possibility is Homo heidelbergensis, which had dispersed into Europe by about 700,000 years ago. A heidelbergensis skull from Greece dated to roughly 300,000 years ago, though quite a lot younger than the proposed crossings, shows that this species was present in the region and the closest human fossil we have to the sailings. Ultimately, fossil evidence from the Cyclades dating to around 450,000 years ago will be needed to confirm exactly which human species made these early sea journeys. Unfortunately, most islands outside of Crete have yielded very little fossil evidence, as their sediments offer poor preservation. This means we know relatively little about what the land and its ecosystems looked like 450,000 years ago. For a long time, Crete was the only island with identified species, but since 2013, new discoveries on the island such as Tilos and across the Cyclades have begun to change that picture, revealing fossils like the straight-tusked elephant, a species that these ancient humans may well have encountered or even hunted. The ancient hominins were likely drawn to the island as it would have been visible from the mainland, offering an attractive incentive to explore new areas. We know the human species like to explore new places, and they could see that perhaps there was a better place to find resources they needed: food, water, and stone. The presence of the islands would have given archaic settlers a strong motivation to develop floating craft that could be guided across the ocean and landed on those virgin shores. This does not prove that they built boats, but they could have created primitive rafts or simply floated by holding onto a tree trunk. This means that these hominins already had developed cognitive abilities. To cross and colonize an island requires cooperation, a common language, and complex communication. The study did not go further than 500,000 years into the past because we do not have reliable data for the coastlines of Greece and Turkey before this period. Once again, on a windswept island in the Aegean Sea, A discovery buried in the rock challenged everything we thought we knew about ancient man and the true antiquity of seafaring. Excavators in 2010 found stone tools on the Greek island of Crete dating back to at least 130,000 years. Archaeologists around the world were both stunned and skeptical, but since then, at that site and others, researchers have quietly built up a convincing case for Stone Age seafarers and for the even more remarkable fact that they were Neanderthals, the extinct cousins of modern humans. American archaeologist Thomas Strasser, who co-led a Greek-US team with archaeologist Curtis Reynolds, discovered the Paleolithic stone tools and argued that they represent a seaborne migration of Neanderthals from the Near East to Europe. The team used a variety of techniques to date the soil around the tools to at least 130,000 years old, but they could not pinpoint a more exact date, and the stratigraphy of the site is unclear, raising questions about whether the artifacts are as old as the soil they were embedded in. So, other archaeologists were skeptical, but the surprise discovery prompted researchers to scour the region for additional sites, an effort that is now bearing fruit. Over 2,000 stone tools have now been found across multiple sites near the town of Plakias on the southwestern shore of Crete that are most likely from Neanderthals. These include hand axes, cleavers, and scrapers made of quartz. The tools found across Crete resemble the Acheulean and Mousterian tool industries, indicating intriguing seafaring capabilities a long time ago. The exact method of travel is unknown, but it must have involved some form of watercraft or a now lost sea crossing. To add to all of this, Strasser believes the picks, cleavers, scrapers, and bifaces were so plentiful that a one-off accidental stranding seems unlikely. This was an organized and deliberate expansion to Crete. Meanwhile, far away in Western Europe, an extraordinary discovery from 50,000 years ago offers a glimpse into the ingenuity of the Neanderthals. In a cave in France, researchers found a 3-ply cord fragment from the inner bark of a conifer tree, still attached to a stone tool. The fibers had been carefully separated into 3 strands, each twisted clockwise in what's known as an S-twist, and then woven together anti-clockwise in a Z-twist to form a durable cord. This simple piece of string reveals something remarkable. Neanderthals understood complex concepts of structure, pattern, and sequence, the mental building blocks of mathematical thinking, like pairs and sets. Twisted fibers, like these, form the foundation for ropes, clothing, net, and possibly even boats. While not directly related to the early seafaring seen in the Mediterranean, this discovery hints at a wider story. The ability to make a cord suggests Neanderthals could have had the practical knowledge and creativity needed to build simple watercraft, perhaps wooden logs bound together with cords. It's speculative, but it shows that Neanderthals were not only toolmakers, they were innovators, capable of tying, binding, and assembling materials to create entirely new technologies. Around 130,000 years ago, Crete's landscape looked much like it does today: rugged mountains, steep rocky slopes, and deep valleys. Yet the world around it was very different. Lower sea levels exposed a far broader coastal plain, giving the island more open space and gentler shorelines. Crete was home to a remarkable set of endemic animals, which Neanderthals likely hunted, including dwarf elephants, dwarf hippos, and several forms of dwarf deer, all shaped by thousands of years of island isolation. Large owls, vultures, and many other bird species also lived across the island. Neanderthal artifacts have also not turned up just on Crete, but have turned up on a number of islands, including at Stolida on the island of Naxos in a flint quarry. Naxos sits 250 kilometers north of Crete in the Aegean Sea. Even during glacial times, when sea levels were lower, it was likely accessible only by watercraft. There, another Greek-Canadian team discovered hundreds of stone tools, including hand axes and blades that resemble the Mousterian toolkit technology made by both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens 50,000 to 200,000 years ago, and which were more sophisticated than those of Crete in their method of construction, including preparing a stone core before striking flakes off it. The tools have been dated to at least 200,000 years ago. Other Paleolithic tools that appear to be Mousterian have been recovered on the western Ionian islands of Kefalonia and Zakynthos. The plethora of sites adds weight to the idea of purposeful settlement. People were going back and forth to islands much earlier than previously thought. But determining which of today's islands were truly islands tens of thousands of years ago isn't easy, as it depends on local land movements as well as broader sea level changes. This is where we enter the story, Homo sapiens. The first evidence we have of our own species seafaring is the colonization of the region Sahul, an ancient landmass that once connected Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania around 50,000 years ago. A 2017 study led by Chris Clarkson of the University of Queensland at the Majabebe Rock Shelter north of Australia's Northern Territory suggests the area may have been occupied much earlier, at least 65,000 years ago. His team of archaeologists discovered stone tools and ochre crayons at this rock shelter, but dating was complicated by shifting sand layers, which can make artifacts appear older. Although the team estimated an age of about 65,000 years in this study, the site's extreme antiquity makes its true occupation date uncertain. In a more recent 2025 study, Australian anthropologists suggest that hominins may have arrived on the continent slightly later than previously thought. With the exception of the debated Majabebe site, all known archaeological evidence dates to between 43,000 and 54,000 years ago. In addition, 4 independent genetic studies indicate that humans could not have reached Australia earlier than about 55,000 years ago. But regardless of the exact date, the real question remains, how did they get there, and was it intentional? An intriguing 2019 study published in Nature answers exactly this. The paper examines how anatomically modern humans colonized Sahul during the low sea levels via the island archipelago of Wallacea. They employ visibility modeling, ocean draft simulation, and demographic modeling to test whether arrival in Sahul could plausibly be the result of random drift, basically people accidentally washed off islands, or required intentional seafaring. Their results showed that the chances of reaching Sahul by accident were extremely low unless sizable groups, specifically around 40 adults, were swept from nearby islands roughly once every 20 years. If voyagers can choose favourable departure times and sustain even modest directed motion towards a destination, the probability of successful arrival rises dramatically. Between the two main proposed routes from Sunda to Sahul, the northern route involved island hopping from Borneo to Sulawesi, then continuing through a series of islands to New Guinea, which was then connected to Australia. Another possibility involved travelling through islands like Java, Flores, and Timor before making the final sea crossing to the northern coast of Australia. Van modelling suggests the northern route is more likely as it has fewer and shorter crossings and better visibility between islands to have been used. From this, they conclude the initial human settlement of Sahul was unlikely to have been purely accidental drift. It more plausibly involved intentional and directed voyages, meaning early humans had maritime capabilities, planning, navigation, and watercraft when crossing deep water gaps. The founding population arriving in Sahul likely was sizable, probably hundreds of individuals, and the colonization occurred over relatively short timeframes. They stated just a few centuries. The first people to set foot in Sahul would have witnessed an extraordinary world, a land cooler and drier than today, though not at the height of the Ice Age. Pollen analysis show much of northern Australia was covered in widespread tropical savanna and open woodland. Paleoclimate records show that northern Australia experienced seasonal monsoons, but with less rainfall overall than today. The interior was already semi-arid, with large grasslands, scattered trees, and seasonal rivers. Coastal areas had mangroves, lagoons, and river deltas rich with fish, shellfish, and other resources. The landscape also teemed with giant Pleistocene megafauna, such as Diprotodon, the world's largest marsupial, about the size of a rhino, roamed the plains. giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, and enormous flightless birds like Genyornis inhabited the open woodlands. Northern regions had crocodiles, giant lizards, giant wombats, and large snakes. But most of these species disappeared between 50,000 to 45,000 years ago, not long after human arrival, due to a combination of human activities and environmental changes. Rivers and wetlands would have been rich in water birds and aquatic life, ideal hunting and gathering grounds. The people likely followed river systems and freshwater sources inland, gradually adapting to different environments, from lush coasts to dry deserts. Unfortunately, many of the coasts the first settlers saw are now underwater, hundreds of kilometers from today's shoreline. Interestingly, when humans migrated from Sunda landmasses through the Wallacea archipelago to Sahul, some populations stayed behind and settled on the islands. Early communities on these islands developed strong coastal and maritime subsistence strategies, relying heavily on marine resources like fish, shellfish, and sea urchins. Evidence, such as the transport of chert, a type of stone used for tools, from source islands to distant settlement sites, indicate early forms of inter-island movement and potential trade networks well before the Holocene. For example, chert artifacts found at the Elivevan settlement site on Fordata Island are believed to have been sourced from the distant islands of Ungar and Leiborbar, which are over 60 kilometers away. No local source of chert is known on Fordata itself, suggesting the raw material was transported by early inhabitants, likely via watercraft. Human remains on islands like Aelor suggest populations that were osteometrically distant from those in late Pleistocene Sunda and Sahul, indicating local adaptations and long-term settlement. By 34,000 to 25,000 years ago, there is clear evidence for purposeful voyaging to islands like Buka and Manus in the Bismarck archipelago, involving open ocean crossings of 140 to 200 kilometers, demonstrating that early Southeast Asian peoples had developed and maintained a strong maritime tradition, something that still persists to this day. Further up north in Asia, between 35,000 and 27,500 years ago, Paleolithic humans reached the Ryukyu Islands, Japan. Evidence suggests a deliberate migration across the sea from Taiwan to the Ryukyu chain, which involved crossing one of the world's strongest ocean currents, the Kurashiro, using dugout canoes. The Ryukyu Islands are a chain of approximately 100 islands stretching about 1,200 kilometers between Taiwan and Kyushu. The islands provided a unique but challenging environment for the early inhabitants, with only some being suitable for settlement. Paleolithic sites are scattered across the larger islands, suggesting an extensive human dispersal by at least 30,000 years ago. The oldest evidence indicates humans arrived on the islands around 35,000 to 30,000 years ago, with some sites suggesting evidence of human presence up to 27,500 years ago. The Paleolithic people on the islands developed a culture and lifestyle adapted to their own new environment. Archaeological findings from sites like Sakatari Cave on Okinawa Island include artifacts made from shells such as beads, scrapers, and fishhooks, as well as evidence of seasonal fishing and hunting of freshwater crabs. A June 2025 Science Advances study tested dugout canoes via experimental voyages across the Kurashiro Current, which is one of Earth's strongest. Replicas carved from single logs using Paleolithic tools successfully navigated 100+ kilometers, carrying 4 to 6 people and gear. This validates seafaring models for Homo sapiens reaching Japan from Taiwan, with evidence from tools and faunal remains. After the last ice age, Neolithic populations used seafaring to colonize islands like Crete and Cyprus around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Later maritime trading cultures like the Minoans, Greeks, and Romans established extensive trade networks and colonies across the Mediterranean. From the late 8th to early 11th centuries CE, the Vikings of Scandinavia were skilled seafaring adventurers who used versatile longships to raid, trade, and settle across the British Isles, Iceland, Greenland, Normandy, Russia, Ukraine, and briefly North America. In modern times, Britain used its maritime power to conquer and control its empire by leveraging its powerful navy to secure global sea lanes, transport troops and supplies, project military force, and protect trade routes. Naval dominance allowed Britain to establish colonies, suppress rivals, and maintain control over its vast territories across the world, which led to the largest empire of all time, controlling 24% of the world's total landmass and 23% of the world's population. For almost as long as humans have existed, our hunger for exploration and our willingness to use the sea as a pathway to new horizons have driven us to leave familiar shores in search of unknown lands to discover and settle. It's clearly in our nature to explore, and that journey never really ends.